Men's downhill is the biggest event in alpine ski racing. It's the fastest competitive sport on earth without any external acceleration. Just a pair of skis and the gravity of a mountain covered in snow and ice. It's all about speed, flowing with the terrain while finding the shortest line. The ones that pull it off become legends of the sport. Others face disaster. While skiing as a sport has its deepest roots in the Nordics, the true birthplace of alpine ski racing lies in the Austrian and Swiss Alps. At the turn of the 20th century, the Czech pioneer Matthias Darski introduced new kind of bindings, and in the Austrian Kitzbühel, the very first downhill ski race took place in 1906. But the real beginning of alpine ski racing, as we know it today, was in Switzerland. The Swiss Alps were one of the main travel destinations for the British upper class. Their love for mountaineering and skiing boosted tourism in Switzerland in a major way. Their travels were also crucial aspects in the development of new mountain infrastructure. Arnold Lonn, whose father ran a travel agency, spent a lot of his time in the Swiss Alps and was a passionate skier. In 1911, he organized a timed race with international competition in Crans-Montana, in the Swiss canton of Valais. Earl Roberts of Kandahar donated the trophy for what is widely regarded as the first real downhill in history. Over a decade later, on the other side of the Alps, in the canton of Bern, Lonn defined a second discipline, the modern slalom. Together with downhill, it builds the foundation of alpine ski racing as it is known today. But unlike the slalom, where racers need fluid technique for quick turns, downhill is a test of strength and courage, with racers reaching high speeds and navigating long, open courses. Because of its dangers, downhill racing established itself from the beginning as the most exciting discipline to watch. But it needed some time until alpine skiing got its true breakthrough. The 1920s marked the most important decade for winter sports in general. It was during these years that the first Olympic Winter Games took place and the International Ski Federation FIS or FIS was founded. But their ski competitions were still limited to cross-country and ski jumping, since alpine skiing wasn't an established sport yet. It took Arnold Lonn a lot of lobbying to help alpine skiing get the institutional recognition he thought it deserved. Together with the Swiss Walter Amstutz, the Austrian Hannes Schneider and others, Lonn founded several new ski racing clubs. And in 1928, he organized the very first Arlberg-Kandahar race in St. Anton. It was the start of a new series, which would become the precursor to the World Cup. During this time, British skiers were among the best racers in the world. Most of them were trained by Swiss coaches. But since the Brits won more and more competitions, they seemed to be overtaking the Swiss. Rumors started spreading that the British would soon spend their winter vacations in the Austrian St. Anton instead of the Bernese Alps, because they could no longer learn anything in Switzerland. This meant that the livelihood of many Swiss ski instructors was at stake, which created the necessity of a new benchmark race to show off the strength of Swiss skiing. In 1930, as an answer to the tensions, the Bernese Ernst Gertsch founded the Lauberhorn races in Wengen. And even though it was the British Bill Bracken who won the combination of downhill and slalom at the first iteration of the Lauberhorn, Ernst Gertsch went on to win the dedicated slalom, while another Swiss, Christian Ruby, won the downhill, thus saving Swiss skiing credibility. The Lauberhorn race became an instant success with skiers and the public. It was, together with the Kandahar races, a major factor for FIS to officially recognize alpine ski racing. A year later, FIS already organized the first World Championships in the iconic Berner Oberland region, and from there on out, the sport accelerated. Also in 1931, another benchmark ski race established itself, the Hahnenkamm Downhill in Kitzbühel. While the Lauberhorn is the longest and therefore physically most demanding race, the Hahnenkamm turned out to be the toughest and most brutal downhill on the circuit. To this day, both the Lauberhorn and the Hahnenkamm races remain the most iconic alpine skiing competitions in the world. The success of Kitzbühel and Wengen, together with the Arlberg-Kandahar races, led other countries to join the alpine skiing craze. In France, the ski school of Val d'Isère laid the groundwork for the French domination that followed. Then the winter sport destinations of Chamonix and the German Garmisch became part of the Arlberg-Kandahar series. They rotated with St. Anton in hosting the event, which would set the blueprint for the later established World Cup. But with the expansion of ski races and technological evolutions, a new threat to the sport emerged. And it was lethal. It just took a couple of years until alpine skiing became an Olympic sport. The first and only gold medal went to the racers who could combine the best time in slalom and downhill. These Olympics were held in 1936 in the German Garmisch-Partenkirchen. And among many tragedies at that time, Germany not only hosted the first Olympic alpine ski race, but also its first death. In 1938, during a Kandahar downhill in Garmisch, two-time World Championship runner-up Giacinto Sartarelli crashed into a tree and died the next day. The same fate struck his Italian compatriot Ilio Colli in 1953 during a downhill race on home snow. Back then, racers competed with woolen clothes, simple goggles and leather boots locked down to their skis, but rarely with a helmet, and if they did, it was made out of thin leather. Meanwhile, new technologies and better training methods made the racers faster and faster. In Kitzbühel, the Hahnenkamm downhill had a new course record almost every year. Within just 30 years, it got nearly halved. The average speed went from around 33 miles or 50 kilometers per hour in the 1930s to 90 toward the end of the 1960s, with top speeds well over 120 kilometers per hour, as fast as normal cars on highways. But the safety measures at the ski races, unfortunately, didn't keep up with this evolution. In 1959, again at a Kandahar downhill in the German Garmisch-Partenkirchen, the death of John Semmeling from Canada shook the core of the alpine skiing world. His crash and its aftermath led to major changes regarding safety at ski racing events. Leather turned into hardshell helmets made out of fiberglass and plastic. Skis got safety release bindings, and race courses started to get better inspections, medical staff, and the first versions of protective barriers. But the evolution of downhill racing itself was still faster. Since television became more and more widely available, the promoters of the sport wanted to enhance the spectacle, while the athletes' equipment made them quicker with every passing year. The tragic incidents therefore didn't stop and impacted even the biggest events. The Olympic Games of 1964 in Innsbruck are an especially dark chapter for Austria's and general ski racing history. During the same training session for the men's downhill, two racers got heavily injured, and another one, the Australian Ross Milne, died. The tragedies led to changes within the organization of the sport, but they also sparked some morbid fascination among the spectators, who suddenly saw how truly dangerous downhill racing could be. Considering the dangers of alpine skiing, it's even more disturbing to realize that the racers weren't allowed to take any money for their athletic skills. The rich aristocrats of the time imposed the so-called amateur rule not to protect the sport, but to keep the poorer part of society from making it, while hiding behind talks of purity of the sport. Getting the chance to make good money was a major reason for the first global superstars of alpine ski racing, Tony Seiler and Jean-Claude Killy, to retire in their early to mid-20s. But their decisions also broke the mold for the generations that followed. During the 1960s, most athletes had found ways around the amateur rule, although the authorities still tried to enforce it, especially by setting an example with suspending Karl Schranz from the 1972 Olympics. But with time, the rule got watered down step by step until it eventually dissolved. Thanks to TV, ski racing got much more exposure. Being able to see the dangers of the sport also gave it a certain aura. Seiler used this to his advantage and started appearing in movies. Many others followed in his footsteps, albeit not in the same capacity. For the 1969 James Bond movie On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which was largely filmed in Switzerland, a promising young Swiss ski racer acted as a stuntman. His name was Bernhard Russi. The then 20-year-old raced down the Schilton in the Bernese Alps for a movie scene when he suddenly crashed and fractured a cervical vertebra. But this didn't stop him from becoming one of the most influential downhillers in history. Although Switzerland and its skiers played a major role in the development of alpine ski racing, its athletes were mostly playing second fiddle to the Austrian and French powerhouses of the time. And even though the nation had a Slalom World Cup champion in Domenech Giovagnoli, Bernhard Russi was something else. Growing up in the depths of central Switzerland, Russi quickly gained mass popularity in his home country. He was elegant on the slopes and could go with the flow of the terrain like no other. In 1970, he landed his first coup by becoming downhill world champion. A year later, Russi won his first discipline World Cup title. Then came the turning point for Switzerland's self-image as a leading ski racing country. Since the Austrian Karl Schranz, who had dominated the season thus far, was banned from the 1972 Olympic Winter Games in Sapporo and immediately retired afterwards, the downhill gold medal was up for grabs. Bernhard Russi seized the opportunity, won the race and all of the subsequent races that season, and therefore defended his title as the best downhill ski racer of the early 70s. He also got the symbolic award Skieur d'Or for the best ski racer of the year, which put him on the top of the world in his sport. But not only did Switzerland get its first Olympic gold medal in men's ski racing with Bernhard Russi, the downhill of Sapporo also had a Swiss runner-up, and his name was Roland Colombin. Colombin was a different breed than Russi. He was not elegant, but fierce, attacking the racetrack like no other, rocketing straight down the fall line. The French and the German-speaking Swiss were no friends, but rivals. You could maybe even say they hated each other's guts. Roland Colombin might not have had the womanizing charisma of Bernhard Russi, but he was fearless and, most importantly, he was winning. After 1972, Colombin started dominating the sport of downhill ski racing. First, he took away Russi's discipline World Cup title and defended it. Then, he set a new fastest time on the Streifen Kitzbühel, taking away Jean-Claude Killy's course record. Due to his style, he was constantly flirting with disaster, and in December 1974, it became his downfall. In the season's first downhill at Val d'Isère, Roland Colombin bruised his spine, but he fought for his career and attempted a comeback. A year later, at the very same jump, he fell again and broke 2 vertebrae, which paralyzed him for 2 days and ended his racing career. But that day was not only the end of Colombin's career, it was also the end of the first Swiss domination in downhill. Because a new champion was already bursting onto the scene, and he led the sport to its first true peak. Naming the best alpine ski racer of a time isn't as straightforward as you might think. On one hand, there's the overall World Cup, back then consisting of 3 core disciplines: the technical disciplines of slalom and giant slalom, and the speed discipline of downhill, which is considered to be the hardest one. Whoever amasses the highest total of points across all 3 disciplines during a season wins the overall title. This gave the technicians a crucial advantage, since there were more races being held for them. Meanwhile, the downhill attracted the largest audience. It was always the biggest event, the flagship of the sport. To reconcile with this imbalance, the International Ski Federation created a paper race, the Combined. It was the first Olympic discipline in alpine skiing and was technically the most important one to determine the best overall ski racer for a long time, although the FIS didn't award World Cup titles for it until 1976 and only treated it as a calculated result exclusively at World Championships. Between the 1950s up until 1980, the combined title was calculated based on the total result in all 3 core disciplines. That meant that the world champion in combined was widely regarded as the best overall ski racer in the world. And in 1974, his name was Franz Klammer. Klammer's style was revolutionary. He combined Russi's charm with Colombin's fearlessness. On the slopes, Klammer chose impossibly direct lines and attacked turns lower and tighter than anyone before him. He trained relentlessly from a young age, without having access to lifts or groomed pistes. His experience on rough, natural terrain gave him unmatched stability. Franz Klammer won his first World Cup downhill and became world champion in combined at only 20 years of age, just one season after his debut on the tour. A year after that, he was already nearly unstoppable. In the 1974-75 season, Franz Klammer won 8 out of 9 downhills and set a new course record on the Hahnenkamm in Kitzbühel. With that, he resoundingly restored Austria's pride after being dethroned by the Swiss. It goes without saying that Klammer also won the discipline title that season, but his true masterclass was yet to come. In 1976, the Olympic Winter Games took place in the Austrian Innsbruck again, only 12 years after the tragic incidents of the mid-60s. But this time, instead of being a place of tragedy, it became the stage for arguably the greatest ski race in the sport's history. Since on the women's side, Annemarie Moser-Pröll stepped away from the gates, all the pressure of the home crowd laid on Franz Klammer. Everybody was expecting him to win the downhill on the Patscherkofel racecourse, which was steep, fast and unforgiving. Over 60,000 spectators were lining the course and watching in the stands. It's the biggest crowd ever for a ski race. Dozens of millions of people all over the world were watching live through color television, which was a widespread commodity by this time. All that made the 1976 Olympic downhill in Innsbruck the biggest event in the history of alpine ski racing. And the race lived up to the expectations. Franz Klammer drew the worst possible starting number in his position, 15. This meant that of all the favorites, he came last. On the other side, it was the defending Olympic champion Bernhard Russi as the racer number 3 who could set the bar early on. And that's exactly what he did. Russi came down with a lead of almost 2 seconds and defended his leading spot until the end of the top group. But then came Franz Klammer. His run was on the edge of disaster, wild and aggressive, but at the first intermediate time, he was still behind Russi. After a second intermediate, Russi was still in the lead. The spectators were getting louder and louder. The mountain started to shake. Klammer took more and more risks. He almost crashed several times, but each time he recovered, carrying even more speed. At the end, Franz Klammer crossed the finish line 0.33 seconds ahead of Bernhard Russi. This moment became an iconic cornerstone of Olympic ski racing history, and Franz Klammer became the new national hero of Austria. Including his run for Olympic gold, Franz Klammer won 10 races in a row that season, leading into the next. Between 1975 and 1978, he crowned himself World Cup downhill champion 4 times straight. During that time, he also claimed the downhill double of Lauberhorn and Kitzbühel 3 seasons in a row. No other speed skier ever came close to those kinds of feats. But after all these years of glory, came a long period of crisis. After Franz Klammer's brother Klaus became paraplegic due to a downhill crash, the Corinthians' numbers started to slowly plummet. Then he changed his ski supplier from Fischer to Kneissl, but instead of improvements, Klammer faced even more downfalls. It took him 4 years and a ski change to Blizzard until he finally won a race again. And in 1983, he managed to become the Downhill World Cup champion for a 5th time, a record that still stands to this day. It's hard to imagine that there will ever be another downhill giant like Franz Klammer. Not only his athletic achievements, but also his charisma made him widely popular during a time when ski racing seemed to be at its peak. In Switzerland, Bernhard Russi stayed an icon of the sport and a national celebrity. Among several other ventures, he became a leading commentator for Swiss TV and introduced POV camera runs to World Cup coverage. But most notably, he became the leading course designer in ski racing, designing Olympic-level racetracks for several decades all around the world. Which is why, to this day, a lot of jumps on the downhill tour are named after him. Jean-Claude Killy called him the Picasso of downhill ski racing. Both Russi's and Klammer's names are still relevant for the sport, but their careers also coincided with the end of a time when single countries dominated the sport and marked the beginning of new nations finding their place on the map of alpine ski racing.